Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Queerness Diaries. I'm super excited today because I am joined all the way from Philadelphia in the US by Michael Galvan, and we're going to be delving in today to his Queerness Diary, and we're going to be delving into a whole new story to start off 2025. So I'm very happy to have you here joining me on the podcast, all the way from Philadelphia, isn't it right?
Yeah, that's right. And thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I think we've met so many people through LinkedIn and the platform. It's been amazing, how we can connect as a community all around the world with each other and have these conversations. And, it's been almost a year since I started the podcast now, but it's always amazing all the new people that I get to meet. So I'm super excited to have you here on the podcast with me today and to delve into your story as well. So thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the ability to have a conversation to remove stigmas around mental health is so critical and so important. And I've been, ever since my own diagnosis with bipolar 1 disorder, tried to be as open and transparent about it as I possibly could be.
Yeah.
I think I was thinking about this earlier. I am coming up on 8 years of my diagnosis. It would be 8 years on the 20th of January. And a lot has happened over the last week that has like really had me thinking about my journey in the mental health space, and I'm also in recovery for alcoholism, and so my sobriety date is coming up as well. And just a lot of emotions at this time of year.
Yeah.
I think just to jump straight in, I kind of always knew I was a different kid than the rest of the kids.
Mm.
I knew from a very early age that I liked boys.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think it was like kindergarten when I was like, I think my mom first explained to me what being gay was when I was like 6 or 7, and I was like,
Yeah.
this doesn't sound bad.
Yeah.
This sounds
Yeah.
right, you know? Um, but around that time too, I was in a very conservative church, a very conservative household. And so not only was I getting the messages of like, here's what being gay is, but also being gay is bad and you shouldn't want to do that. You shouldn't do
Yeah.
that. Um, and I think I internalized it pretty strongly. I remember my first bout of depression hit when I was 7 years old.
Mm.
Um, I promised myself for my eighth birthday that my eighth birthday gift to myself was that I was going to kill myself. I wanted to take a kitchen knife and do it. I won't get into the details of it, but I had a plan. And I honestly had suicidal ideation and everything like that associated with it. And I don't know why I didn't go through with it. I never,
Yeah.
you know, really have been in the mind space to kind of evaluate that. But I think that the process of like realizing that for me, my mental health journey started at a very early age because of some self-identity things and also overarching mental health issues. It was very interesting.
Yeah.
Um, I was coming out, I think at the age of most kids my age were coming out at 12, 13, 14 years old.
Yeah.
Um, and I feel like for for a while there I was deeply devoted to my faith, and so it was just kind of like this weird conundrum of like, well, I could be gay, but my faith says that I shouldn't be.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
And I was such an interesting little teenager too. Um, I think we all were, but
Yeah. We all had our quirks.
yeah, we all had our quirks.
Yeah.
And um, I remember being such a bully trying to like figure out who I was, that I
Mm.
was just mean to everybody around me for no reason at all.
Yeah.
Um, I was in high school marching band and I made our assistant band director cry one day because
Mm.
I was just being such a little prick. And it was a fun experience. But I think that the fear that I felt in that space was something that I really needed to evaluate on my own and deal with on my own. Uh,
Yeah.
and I remember formally coming out my senior year of high school. I lived in the suburbs of the city of Dallas, Texas, and there was this boy in the city of Houston, Texas that was cute, had a little
Yeah.
crush on. He was about my age. And I wanted him to come up for my high school graduation and stay
Mm.
with me. And my parents found out that there were ulterior motives to that request.
Yeah.
Um, and he was not allowed to come up. And my parents um, went through all my MySpace messages, all my Zanga messages back in the day, uh,
Yeah.
and uncovered all of this, like me talking to other boys about me being gay and all that jazz. And um, went probably what I deemed to be way overboard in that space.
Mm.
They took away my keys, they took away my phone, my
Yeah.
wallet, and they kicked me out of the house.
Mm.
Um, and I think that's um, I mean, I look back on that moment as like a really pivotal moment in like a life-changing way because I had a trajectory of my life before then that I thought was going to happen, and then that shifted everything that I knew. Um, I remember in that space, my parents tried to weaponize therapy against me, which was interesting.
Mm.
Um, they, I told them like, hey, look, I'd be totally willing to go and like have a discussion about my sexuality, my mental health, all of
Yeah.
these things with this certified therapist, a professional in this space.
Mm.
And they agreed. Um,
Mm.
and then they drove me to my church's priest's house and said you had to go talk to the priest when I was supposed to
Yeah.
be going
Yeah.
to a therapy appointment.
Mm.
Um, and so for a while there, I didn't trust therapy or therapeutic services at all after that because I was like, I don't know what the like
Yeah.
relationship is going to be like. I don't know how the process is going to occur. When I moved out for college, um, I think having a lack of a base of mental health supports and an understanding of my sexuality really did a number on me. I turned to alcohol very quickly.
Yeah.
Um, there would be days where I would drink myself to sleep like consistently, because that's the only way I could make my thoughts in my head stop.
Yeah.
I would drink between classes. I would skip and drink during classes. Like it was a mess. Um, and the entire time I was just like dealing with this pain and trauma of my life, from my teenage years. Um,
Mm.
I met the man who would eventually become my husband around that time. He was going to a university in the same town that I was in.
Yeah.
Um, so that was kind of cute. We got set up on a blind date. Our
Oh,
uh,
nice.
our mutual friend who set us up said we were both mutually boring.
It's always nice though to hear like these stories of blind dates and to know they work out because you don't hear about these stories very often. And so I always think it's amazing when it does work out, you know.
Yeah, well, the fun fact is that he tried breaking up with me about 2 weeks into it,
Yeah.
and I told him no. Um, I said, you got to give me at least a month, and then we
Yeah.
can we can do what we need to do from there. Um, and then a month later, it turned into we're celebrating 12 years together now.
Oh,
So
congrats. Yeah,
thank
that's
you.
awesome.
But Keegan was the one who was like, my husband was the one who was like, you need to go to therapy. Like, I don't think there was anything at the time. He was like, I don't think there's anything mentally wrong, but you have deep family trauma,
Yeah.
and therapy will help you work through that. And he was like, I went to therapy. My parents went to therapy. My brother went to therapy. Like everyone in my family goes to therapy. Like that's just a thing. We do it.
Yeah.
Um, and so I refused for years because I was like, therapy is not for me. I don't have anything wrong with me. It's okay. I'm fine. Um, Mind you, at this time, I was like in a really manic state the entire time. I was sleeping like 2 hours a night. I was working like five
Yeah.
jobs and going to grad school. And I was like living high on life and thought I was like the shit.
Yeah.
Um, and I didn't think there was anything wrong. I was like, everything's going my way. I'm
Yeah.
drinking to excess. I'm getting very little sleep, but I still have good grades and my life isn't completely falling apart. So like nothing could be wrong, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and we moved eventually. I think it was in January of 2015 when we moved from Dallas to Philadelphia. So we've been here 10 years now. Um, and he I was working this campaign job in the city. And I remember one day just completely crashing and burning mentally. Like I went
Yeah.
from this high to suicidal depression and ideation.
Mm.
Um, and I couldn't figure out why. Like nothing in my life was wrong. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
technically wrong. I had a husband or a partner at the time, a boyfriend at the time, two cats, an apartment that was not the best, but it was like a good first apartment, you know?
Yeah.
Um, and I told my husband, I was like, I want to start going to therapy. Like, I think
Mm.
now's the time.
Yeah.
Um, the first therapist we went to, we did as couples therapy, just so I could get acclimated to the process.
Mm.
Um, and I hated her. I just could not stand her,
Yeah.
because she kept like being like, well, Michael's always wrong. Michael
Mm.
is bad. Michael did this wrong. Michael did that wrong. And I'm like, I'm not just like an inherently bad person here. I have made mistakes, but like, let's go.
Yeah. Oh, that must have
Um,
been so frustrating though.
yeah, it was very frustrating. And I could never grasp why she was saying the things that she was saying. And then in October of 2016, I remember being at the train station in Philly,
Yeah.
underground, and my first thought was like, I this is it, I'm done.
Mm.
Um, and I had a plan that night. Um, and I don't remember what happened next. I didn't execute the plan, obviously. I'm still here, but like
Mm.
the thought scared me deeply. And I
Yeah.
remember going home to my husband and saying, like, something's wrong. I don't
Mm.
know what it is, but something's wrong.
Yeah.
Um, because I had been on an SSRI for depression, but like it seemed to have stopped working and
Mm.
all my life was fine. I had a decent job. I was, nothing in my life should have caused me to have that thought.
Yeah.
Um, and so we went back to my therapist a few weeks later, and January 20th, 2017, I was like, I first was like, I think I have borderline personality disorder. I can't maintain stable relationships. I feel really like all over the place and chaotic with my emotions, da 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 da. And
Yeah.
so she pulled out the DSM and was
Mm.
like, all right, let's go through it. Let's see what's wrong.
Yeah.
Um, and the conclusion was no, not borderline, but bipolar 1. And she was like, you need to go to a psychiatrist who can technically diagnose you more formally. Um,
Yeah.
you need to definitely get on medications and go from there. Um, that was, like I said, 8 years ago. Um, and I hated the process of psychiatry.
Mm.
Um, Medications, while helpful, and I love them now, the process of
Yeah.
finding the right ones and the right combination of ones at the right
Mm.
balance.
Yeah.
I see, yeah, you're nodding along. I can
Oh,
yeah,
I know, yeah.
yeah,
I've been there, yeah, I know what you mean.
it was rough. I remember one point I ran out of one medication and I let myself stay off of it for a few weeks because I was like, it's fine, like it'll be okay. And then by the time I went to the pharmacy to get it refilled, it was going to be like another week on top of that for the prescription to get filled.
Yeah, yeah.
And I remember going into work one day, 3 weeks off meds, and having a full-blown panic attack in the middle of the office.
Mm.
Like I was sitting at my desk hyperventilating, crying, freaking out, couldn't figure out what was wrong. And one of my friends came over and was like, "You need to go home. Like
Yeah.
you're you're going to be okay, but you need to go home."
Mm.
Um, and so I did. Um, and then the recovery piece is interesting because after a while I started realizing that the meds weren't quite working for me.
Mm.
For about a year, I was on medications and I felt about the same the entire time. So I went back to my therapist and she was like, "Well, you know, do you drink alcohol?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, like everybody drinks alcohol. Like it's not that big of a deal." And she's like, "Well, no, you don't understand. You're on antipsychotics. You can't drink alcohol."
Yeah.
And I was like, "No, that's not how that works. Like if I have a few glasses of wine a night, and when I say a few, I mean like five or six. Like,
Yeah.
it's not that big of a deal. Like, I'm not mixing it at the same time. I take my meds like in the morning and I drink the alcohol at night. Like, it's different,
Yeah.
you know? And she was like, "Okay, well, um, let's go through your drinking history." And so we went through my college history and my post-grad history and all of that jazz. And she was like, "Okay, I'm going to say something that's going to upset you. First and
Yeah.
foremost, you are an alcoholic and you need to go to AA."
Mm.
And I was like, "I am not an alcoholic and I am not going to AA. Like, I can quit anytime. I just don't want to quit," which is like
Yeah. Yeah.
telltale signs of needing to go to recovery.
Mm.
Um, and then she posed this question to me. She goes, "Okay, my husband was in the room." She goes, "Would you stop drinking if it meant saving your marriage?"
Mm.
And I didn't answer the question,
Mm.
which to my husband was more than enough for that he needed to hear.
Yeah.
Um, So we got home. He basically gave me an ultimatum, like, "You're going to AA or I'm leaving."
Mm.
Um, and I did. And it'll be 7 years on February 7th. Um, so not counting that yet, but hopefully getting there one day soon. Um,
That's amazing. And big props to you because I know I always say when it comes to recovery from anything, not giving yourself the pressure of, the milestones, but just that you're achieving it, day by day. And it's something to be so proud of because I know it's not easy. And
yeah,
it's incredible that you've done, almost 7 years.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And it's interesting because it's like, in our community, there are so many spaces built around the consumption of alcohol.
Yeah.
And not knocking anybody that drinks alcohol. Like you can have a drink, it's fine.
Mm.
You don't bother me. But sober spaces are few and far between in the gay community.
Yeah.
And so when I came out of the closet in college, all of my older gay friends, we just went to bars, right? We got drunk and we went
Yeah.
to bars, and that's what we did, you know? And so it
Yeah.
was such a normalized culture to me that, like, when we were evaluating my drinking history in therapy, I was like, "That's not bad. That's not wrong. That is just what,"
Yeah.
right? Um, but it is something that I have to consider because for me specifically, while some of my friends at the bars could have one to two drinks and stop, I couldn't,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know? Um, and I think since since being sober, since being on the right meds, it's been an interesting journey, you know?
Mm.
Life isn't just easy peasy, that you
Yeah.
would expect it to be. Like I went into getting
Mm.
sober and being on my meds thinking like, "Oh, everything's going to be so much easier now," and it's just not, you know.
Yeah.
I've had some of my worst times in my life during my sobriety and my mental health journey over the last 7 years, honestly, because I'm not keeping track of myself and monitoring the work of what my bipolar can do to me if it's not kept in check between therapy, psychiatry, good
Yeah.
regular exercise, medications, a good diet, things like that, like taking care of myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, my husband and I had this big blow up fight maybe 3 or 4 years ago where we almost got a divorce. And
Mm.
honestly, it would have, had you asked me 4 years ago, it would have been totally his fault.
Mm.
Um, but now I look back at it and I'm like, no, I had a big role to play in that.
Mm.
Um, and my mental health isn't to blame per se, but my ability not to be aware of how my mental health affects my life
Yeah.
is a big part of that. Um, I think the conversation that I want to have going forward is that, like, I had a friend who was a therapist when I first got diagnosed say to me, and it's so cliche, but it's so
Mm.
true, and I don't like it when that happens, when cliches are true.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but they said to me, Michael, you are not your mental health diagnoses. You have a mental health diagnosis. You
Yeah.
have bipolar disorder. You are not bipolar.
Mm.
Um, and to me, like over the last several years, that is really manifested in like the ability for me to be aware of like what my journey is and how I shape myself in the world that, or surrounds me.
Yeah.
I'm the one who gets to choose that, and I'm the one responsible for doing that.
Mm.
Not my bipolar disorder. It does not control me.
Yeah.
Um, although if I took off my meds and canceled everything in my life, it probably would control my life.
Yeah.
But I think I'll end my side of the story here, where my aunt just passed away this past weekend. Um, I, never really had a great relationship with my parents again after the trauma of my teenage years.
Mm.
But over COVID, that's something that my parents and I have begun working on again.
Yeah.
I um, came out as an alcoholic to them. I came out as having bipolar disorder to them. I came out as having a husband to them.
Mm.
And over the last several years, we've made it a point to see each other at least 2 to 3 times a year.
Yeah.
Um, and my aunt, who's recently passed, is was my mom's
Mm.
closest sibling.
Yeah.
Um, my aunt had a mental health disability or a mental disability. Um, and so my mom, I think, very much saw herself as the caretaker of my Aunt Sylvia.
Mm.
Um, and Saturday, when my mom was making the funeral arrangements, my dad texted me and he goes, hey, your mom won't ask you this, but she really wants to know if you'll be a pallbearer for Sylvia.
Yeah.
Um, and I said yes. Yeah, I'm gonna fly to Texas later this week, and be there as a pallbearer. I've cried about this a lot, so I might end up crying again here, but I never, even as early as or recently as last year, never thought I would be there like that for my mother.
Yeah.
Um, I never thought I'd have that relationship with her. And it's truly an honor to me
Yeah.
because of the process that we have been through as a family, from her catching me with that knife when I was 8 years old
Yeah.
to her kicking me out of the house.
Mm.
I left this out earlier, but when I first told my parents that I had bipolar disorder, they told
Mm.
me to pray on it,
Yeah.
to now.
Mm.
Um, I owe that to the ability to doctors, psychiatrists, therapists, community members, um, who care about serving and supporting people with mental health disabilities. I owe that to people in recovery, my sponsor, my friends in recovery.
Yeah.
I owe that to people like you, Connor, for making space for this and removing stigmas, right? Like if I didn't have the opportunity to openly talk about, you know, what I needed to in any professional setting or other places like that, like I don't think I'd be here.
Yeah.
You know? And so I'm just so grateful for the process, the journey, the ability just to be where I am today.
I think, your story shows so much strength, and I think it's so important to have those, authentic stories out there when it comes to mental health, because we see so many videos that are kind of, giving advice and all these things on YouTube, but having the real stories from people, there needs to be more of that out there. And thank you so much for being, so open and vulnerable with your story. I think it's incredible, isn't it, the strength we can find within ourselves, considering you never know on this crazy journey of life. Sometimes the curveballs that are coming our way and all the things that can happen, like especially, I mean, who could imagine like since COVID and all these things, especially the way things have planned out, it's like no matter how much we plan our lives, the unexpected keeps happening. But I think it's so admirable, your strength, and like I said, being in recovery, just you have to really be proud of yourself every day achieving that, because I know it's not easy. There's always, you know, temptation there. And like you said, when a lot of people have this environment, especially where we're going out with friends, and it's so normalized for a lot of us, in our 20s or whatever. And then sometimes if you get diagnosed, um, and there's no clear path, is there, when you get diagnosed and you start different medication plans? Sometimes it's easy to think, well, I'm going to carry on, living as I was. And th now
Right.
I've got the diagnosis, okay, and I've got the medication. And sometimes you learn afterwards, it's like, oh crap, because I've been there myself during, I think it was beginning of 2020 when I started on anti-anxiety medication, and I'd still go out and drink, and I didn't realize, I had no conception at all that I was suddenly becoming, a complete disaster to my friends until they were gone. And suddenly I had none of those friendships, and I had to sit with myself, and I was like, I can relate a lot. Like at that period of my life, I had assumed in having the medication and everything that I could just continue as it was. And this was like, yeah, about 5 years ago now. And I think for a lot of us, it's so important to be aware when you get a diagnosis and maybe you start different medications, that it can take years sometimes, to find the right medication and something that works in the body. And also the life you lived before, it's like sometimes you think you're going to start a medication and that's going to solve it, but it's suddenly everything can look completely different. And so it's very important to find those people, isn't it, that you can open up to, and also really research as much as you can, because so many of these medications, they just go so badly with either something else that you're taking. It could be a supplement, or with alcohol, whatever it is, you never know how it's going to react. But when we're given a diagnosis, we don't have that information. So sometimes it can come as a shock, can't it? Because it's like, oh crap, I thought this was going to help me. And how am I feeling worse,
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, no, you said so many good things in there too, Connor. I think like the first thing that really registered with me was that it's still hard, right? Like just because I'm in a good place now. Doesn't mean every day is easy by any means. This morning I was sitting at my desk here in my home office crying to myself for no reason, you
Yeah.
know? I have no idea why, but I just needed to cry and feel bad for a while.
Yeah.
Um, Winter sucks.
Yeah.
Um,
100%. Yeah.
the sun setting at 2:30 in the afternoon, like, is not okay to me.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but
Definitely.
you get through it, and it's something that we were talking about earlier. Like, we take it day by day, pace step by step, right? And that's so critically important. And then the other thing that I really think is so valuable in this space is not to not be afraid of, like, with one, not to be afraid of having like a psychiatrist or a therapist or the stigma around that,
Yeah.
because they're there to help. And my current therapist is like the greatest thing I've ever had in my life.
Yeah.
Um, but also to be a self-advocate in those spaces, right? Like, if something isn't working for you and you can tell, speak up, right? Because, like, I went through 5 or 6 medication regimes before I got on the one that currently I'm on and that
Yeah.
works currently for me. And I could tell on some of those medications within like 2.5 weeks that it wasn't going to go well, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And having a psychiatrist that, like, I trusted to say, like, I need something different, this isn't right, was
Yeah.
so important, you know?
Yeah, and I think being able to have that open dialogue is so important because sometimes as well with different medications, they can seem to be maybe great at first, but sometimes they can taper off. It seems like they're doing great for maybe a few months, and then all of a sudden it can seem like, okay, it's not working so well. And I think sometimes people will be tempted to just up the dosage, and sometimes it's good to just have those open conversations again and be like, look, this isn't working for me. I need to try something different?
Yeah. And I mean, I'll be completely transparent here. I have had the worst trouble with sleep my whole
Mhm.
life. I
Yeah.
used to mix alcohol and NyQuil to fall asleep. Um, and it was like 2 shots of whiskey and a double dosage of NyQuil, and that's how I passed out every night. Um, and I got off sleep aids for a while. I did melatonin for a while. I stopped it for a while, you know.
Yeah.
And then about 3 years ago, I decided I needed to get back on a prescription sleep aid, and I was like a wreck about it. I was so nervous because I was like, I have a history of abusing these. I'm gonna mess up. Something's gonna go wrong.
Yeah.
Um, and I've caught myself recently abusing them.
Mhm.
I'm mixing multiple sleep aids, and honestly, I was lying about it for a while. I lied about it to my husband. I lied about it to my sponsor and the people in my recovery rooms. Lied about it to my doctor.
Yeah.
And I am in a place now where I'm like, oh, I can't do that. That's not okay. Whether I was in recovery or not, like, that's not okay. I shouldn't be doing that. And so I'm trying to be more radically transparent about that process and what that means for me and, like, the long-term effects of that.
Yeah, and I imagine for you as well, it's been probably a process in being able to trust a lot of these healthcare professionals because you've had, in the past, not so great experiences. And also, like you said, with that therapist as well, that kind of shamed you in the past when you were kind of opening up. And so sometimes when you have, a negative experience like that, it can take a while in a healthcare setting to feel comfortable about opening up because you don't want to feel like, something's being weaponized against you and you want to be able to build that trust over time. So I imagine it's been a process finding someone for you that you feel like you've had that level of trust considering what's happened, in the past.
Yeah, I I actually find that most of my therapist transitions happen not by my own doing, but mostly
Mm.
because a therapist leaves the practice, and that's hard. I had
Yeah.
one therapist one time tell me she was leaving the practice, and then she goes, I know you have deep abandonment issues. Tell me how you really feel about this today. And I was like, I cannot do this.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but no, I think the answer in my house growing up was always pray about it.
Yeah.
Turn to God, which, like, I'm not saying don't pray about it, but I'm saying pray and go to a doctor at the same time.
Yeah.
Um, if that's right for you. But there was never the intermingling of the two solutions in my house. It was like, oh, you have bipolar disorder? We'll ask God to remove it.
Yeah.
Like, God is not going to remove this just
Yeah.
like that, you know?
Yeah.
So dealing with the stigma of mental health and that from my family was a really difficult process to get through. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think as well for a lot of us, it's finding that initiative within ourselves when it comes to taking care of our health. Because so many of us grew up in that environment where things were either shut down or, there was an answer maybe by going to church or like, for example, with my family, a lot of it just wasn't talked about. And people tend to say sometimes, oh, well, back in my day everyone didn't have this ADHD or didn't have this. It's like they did, but it just wasn't talked about. And it's always been, there in every family, whatever it is with mental health, it just was very shut down or associated with a lot of shame. And so for a lot of us now, we're taking the initiative to, really seek answers for ourselves. But many of us grew up in an environment where it was either shut down or dismissed, or you didn't want to talk about it. It was like, okay, maybe, if I do this, it will just go away. And then sometimes it gets to the point for a lot of us where we're just trying to dismiss it and just get on with, we think, oh, I can just put it to the back of my head, whatever it is, because we've grown up in that environment where people said, well, we just got on with it in our day, whatever it
Yeah.
is. And then at some point it catches you and you could be not expecting it at all. And so it's so important to take that initiative, I think, within ourselves because there's a lot of information out there today, but we're still a lot of us kind of undoing a lot of that shame and what we were brought up with and those different mindsets.
Yeah, and it's interesting to me when I got my diagnosis originally, I'm a kind of person who's gonna like research everything I can when I know that it affects me.
Yeah.
Um, and so I was reading up on bipolar disorder and I noticed in a few different articles, a lot of them were suggesting, hey, like this might be a genetic thing. There's not enough testing to really know yet, but like there's some indications that there's like a familial tie to this.
Yeah.
Um, And I'm not going to name which member of my family it is for their confidentiality, but when I read that, I was like, I know where this came from.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
if it is genetic, I clearly have a trace, you know.
Yeah.
Um, and it's so funny that like that family member specifically, like, is in the space of shove it under the rug. We're not going to deal with
Mm.
it. It'll go away on its own, sort of thing, you know.
Yeah.
Um, so it's fun. And then the I don't know why this came to my mind, but I remember while you were talking, Connor, I thought through this. Like I had a friend who came out as having bipolar disorder to me when I was in my 20s. And I remember the stigma I felt towards that person. I was like, oh, I don't really know who this person is. They could snap at me at any moment. They could go completely off the handles, blah, 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 blah. Like they're unstable. I can't be around them, you
Yeah.
know? And I ended that friendship not
Mm.
long after that. Um, and then the ironic thing is, like, I have the
Mm.
diagnoses too, and my best friend also has a similar mental health diagnosis as me.
Yeah.
Um, and at this point, I like it's so comforting to have a community where discussing my mental health stigma or mental health is not stigmatized, you know.
Yeah.
Um, I deeply owe that individual from my youth an apology for that process. But um, I I don't know. If the listeners of this podcast get anything out of this, I just want it to be like, people with mental health disorders and disabilities don't, the stigma needs to be removed. It needs to go. And
Yeah.
we're all doing the best we can with what we have
Yeah.
in this
So
crazy,
true.
crazy world right now.
Oh yeah.
Um, so yeah, I just really, really again appreciate the opportunity with you, Connor.
Yeah. It's been so fantastic to have you on, and I really appreciate, your openness and vulnerability. And it's so true when it comes to mental health. I always say society's been built around this idea around one brain, that goes 9 to 5 to work and does all these checklists of things that you're supposed to live your life the specific way. And really, every brain is just different for everyone in its own way. And I think this idea of this society, which is built around, this outdated idea is changing now as we get more people that are becoming more comfortable with their vulnerability and being open. But it's still so important that so many of us get our stories out there and they are heard because we're still, in that process where although it's getting better, it's like we said before, we've maybe grown up with a lot of shame around it, or it's still a process of becoming easier to talk about, whether it's in a workplace and it's that fear, like, or whether you should, open up to people or whether it's in a friendship, it's still an uncomfortable conversation. It's getting easier, but it will always be, it's like I always say, often with me, for example, starting a new job, I'm like, are they going to judge me for my queerness or are they going to judge me for my ADHD? And
Hmm.
then learning to let a lot of that fear go because sometimes, when we've experienced shame in the past or had those negative experiences, it's hard to let them go. But I think the power of having these conversations is it does gradually make them easier. And the more awareness that is out there, the better.
Yeah. Um, so I think you'll appreciate this. I have a 9-year-old son.
Yeah.
Total Gen Alpha kid. Like he is such a Gen Alpha little boy.
Yeah.
And he has ADHD.
Mhm.
Um, and it is so funny how I catch myself and how he catches me,
Yeah.
like in the stigmas of his um mental health, right? Like he'll be having like a rough day or like he'll be a little scattered or trying to do like 20 things at once. And I'm like,
Mhm.
just calm down. Like, let's focus a little bit. And he's like, I can't focus. I have ADHD. You know that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, that's true. You're right. I'm sorry. That's me. That's on me. Um,
Yeah.
and he is so willing to just be like open about that as like
Yeah.
it's just matter of fact to him. It's not stigmatized, it's not negative, it just is, you know?
Yeah.
Um and I mean, I I love Gen Alpha because a lot of like what was stigmatized when we were kids is nothing to them, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
But that is just so cool for me to see the generational effects and the
Yeah,
time
definitely.
of evolution of this work.
Yeah, and I think it really shows to the relationship as well that you've built. And I think that's such an inspiring thing as well, being able to just have those open conversations, with people and being able to build those spaces around us, even if we grew up in an environment where it wasn't so comfortable for us, but making that space, for other people, there's a big power to that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's wonderful. And I yeah, I I think the ability for me to relate to him too is also really cool because
Yeah.
like I have my meds, he has his meds, and I'm like, let's this med helps my brain work, this med helps your brain work. Like this is and we
Yeah.
just do this and this is what we do, you know?
Yeah.
Um, it's really nice. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And it is a crazy journey of life, sometimes the things that are thrown at us, but I think, the way things have gone with mental health discussion, like I don't know about you, but it's just gotten a lot easier over the last few years for me to open up in general. Like, I didn't grow up I always grew up as someone which would try and minimize it. And in workplaces or friendships, I'd just try and, put on the happy face a lot of the time and be a people pleaser and all these things. But as time's gone on, it's gotten year by year a lot easier for me to. And obviously, it depends on the relationship I have to whoever it is. But in general, in my friendships, with my relationships with my family, in workplaces, a lot easier to approach the conversations. And sometimes, I think there's a power just to say, yeah, I'm having a horrible day. Whilst in the past, it was something, that would very much shut down. And I think for a lot of us, that vulnerability, it's so important because if you continue, putting that pressure on yourself, eventually you do get to that point of just feeling burnt out and exhausted. And so, yeah, I think for all of us to be able to just approach those conversations and be able to talk about the highs and lows, it's very freeing in a way because you're not keeping that load of whatever emotions building up inside. Once you say it to one person, it's just very freeing. It's like, oh, thank goodness, I needed to say today was horrible, or maybe it was an
Yeah.
amazing day.
It's like it's like coming out all over again, right? You know? And another like old adage of like gay people, queer people have to come out more than just once, right? Like it's like to your family, to your friends, to your workplace. If you switch jobs, to if you have a new friends group, like you're always coming out of the closet.
Yeah.
Which is exhausting.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I don't know. I feel like you get to a space coming out as a queer person where it's just like you feel comfortable doing it and it's assumed sometimes in some spaces, right? Like,
Yeah.
you're at a certain festival or a certain restaurant or a certain bar and you're just part of the crowd.
Yeah.
But when I was first diagnosed with my bipolar disorder, I was such a interesting, I took such an interesting approach to it. I was like, everyone's gonna know. I'm gonna remove all the stigmas from this disorder single-handedly. I'm gonna like tell everybody in every situation all the time, and you're gonna know this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and not to like scare anybody, but I found that to not be beneficial to me,
Yeah.
right? Um, I lost a job not because I lost a job because of my performance related to my mental health.
Mm.
Even though in that space I was very open about my mental health.
Yeah.
Um, had you asked me this 6, 7 years ago, I would have told you I lost that job because I came out with a mental health disorder.
Mm.
But that's not the reality of the situation. But
Yeah.
now I'm much more veiled about it. Like my friends who know, and it's very similar to like coming out as your coming out with your queerness. It's like
Yeah.
if I'm in a situation and it's just gonna naturally roll off.
Yeah.
Um, if I'm in a place that doesn't feel safe, I might say it to like one or two people who do feel safe in that space, but I'm not going to say it out loud, you know?
Mm.
Um, and it's, again, work like this podcast, these conversations, this community that is so important to that, to
Yeah.
being able to allow people with differentiated learning abilities, mental health disorders, everything to say, like, yeah, I have ADHD, yeah, I have depression, yeah, I have anxiety, all of the terms that we know to be true.
Yeah.
Um, you said one more thing that I wanted to touch on. I can't remember my thought, but
Yeah.
um, I just I think that people come to the comfort that is appropriate for them in the
Mm.
spaces they're at. And it shouldn't always have to be that way.
Yeah. 100%. And I think as well, I don't know about you, but when I finally got my diagnosis, it didn't feel freeing in a way, but it felt like the end of a exhausting process because I spent so many years, like I think many of us do, on every Reddit subpage and Google, like it must be this, it must be that, or I would try and put different attributes of my life to different things to relate. So when I finally got my diagnosis of ADHD, it was more like I almost felt slightly robbed in the way of all those nights that I just sat up till like 2 in the morning, like scrolling through different pages, like trying to think, oh, it must be this or it must be that. And I think, it's we're all our own harshest critic. And, I think the most important thing is to just be able to, whatever journey you're on with your mental health, to have those people around you that you confide in, but be able to trust the process, because sometimes it can be a lengthy process and going to so many different doctors, and it just feels like sometimes for a lot of us, like it never ends, or waiting for another referral or a different medication, whatever it is, to just, the process can be very extensive, but not to punish yourself and be exhausted trying to figure it all out on your own. Because when I look back, I know I probably lost years of my life scrolling through Google and videos and all these things. And when I got diagnosed, I was like, damn, I've just lost so much time.
Yeah, this one hits hard. I when I got the diagnosis for bipolar disorder, I my therapist looked at me and she goes, "You don't seem surprised."
Hmm.
And I was like, "Well, no, like it makes sense. It's fine."
Yeah.
You know? When I went to my psychiatrist the first time and he did the formal screening
Hmm.
with the DSM-5, he goes, "It might be bipolar disorder. It might be schizoaffective disorder.
Hmm.
They get treated the same way, so we're gonna just go with a treatment plan for one of those." And I
Yeah.
was like, "Okay." And so since schizoaffective disorder was a new term to me,
Hmm.
guess who went home and spent
Yeah. Yeah.
hours on YouTube and Google and Reddit and all those things like
Yeah.
what is schizoaffective disorder, symptoms, like treatments, all that. And I am the master of self-diagnoses. So
Yeah.
it's very dangerous. My therapist calls me out on it a lot because I'm like, "Oh, I think I have this," and he'll be like, "Do you really have that, or did you find a symptom that aligns to
Yeah.
what you think it is?"
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
but to your point, like it might be a journey of like 4, 5, 6 doctor visits with 3 different doctors over a course of a year before you get the formal diagnosis of whatever it is it might need to be that you have. And that's fine, right? But
Yeah.
like this, like Michael Galvan, WebMD doctor is not
Yeah.
not the move.
Yeah. I I think as well for it's like I said, with around a lot of other people, there's a lot of shame sometimes involved, but with ourselves, fear so often jumps out, and so we'll be scrolling and then we'll see one word, and immediately with that fear and anxiety, that just triggers it, and we will immediately associate the worst possible symptom with ourselves, and then we start going on. At least I have on a whole separate side quest researching that and putting all these attributes
Mhm.
to myself. So, it's one of those things. It is very much trust the process, and I know everyone does it. We've all been there diagnosing ourselves, but it's important to not punish ourselves for doing that, and also, once we have a healthcare professional, give some clarity to finally accept that and the process as well. Because yeah, I probably, before I got diagnosed, I would have diagnosed myself with about at least 15 different things, and none of them were were true, or maybe they're partly true, but I've not diagnosed with any of them. And it's like looking back, yeah, I would find something and I'd be scrolling. It's like when you get a sickness, and it's like you see one thing and it's like, oh, it must be this.
Right.
I think a lot of that comes from, we all went there at the start of COVID. If anyone had the slightest, loss of taste or whatever it was, be like, oh, it must be COVID. And often we do that to ourselves, So I think we're all guilty of doing it, but it's important to be kind to ourselves and not let that fear and that anxiety take over.
Right. No, I think, well, first to the COVID point, like I had an inflamed lung in like the spring of
Oh,
2020, and I was convinced. I was
mm,
so convinced I had COVID. I went to the ER and they're like, no, it's an inflamed lung. Calm down.
yeah,
You're fine.
yeah,
Um, but I think that there is a value in like doing a little bit of your own research so that you kind of have like a sense of like the terms and the things that you need to know. But
yeah,
like to your point previously, it's like you gotta trust a medical professional, right?
yeah,
Like
yeah,
go to the medical professional, have the conversation or multiple conversations you need to have, and trust that they have the best interest of you at heart, you know? Like they're licensed professionals for a reason. Oh.
yeah,
I remembered what I was gonna say earlier, which was you talked briefly about like, I'm just having a bad day while being at like work or something like that. Like I think that the American healthcare system is light years behind. But the ability to have like a mental health sick day is so important. And like we're not stigmatizing that, right? Like I know I've had people work for me who have called me and been like, "Hey, I literally cannot get out of bed. I'm so upset today." And my first reaction is always like, "Then stay in bed, you know?
yeah, yeah,
Just if you are sick today with depression, or if your depression is acting up, like don't try to work. Do
yeah,
what you need to do."
yeah,
Um,
100%.
and I, you know, it is very like employer by employer here in the States, and I would say a good chunk of
Yeah,
us don't recognize that.
yeah,
And I don't know how it is over in the UK, but I just the ability for somebody to wake up, say, I'm not able to mentally do my job today,
mm, yeah,
and be respected in that space is, I think, somewhere we still need to go deeply.
yeah, yeah, 100%. And I think as well with a lot of us, there's a lot of fear around taking a day or even a week, whatever, however much time you need for yourself. Because again, it goes back to that stigma, with mental health and with a lot of workplaces. I think people still feel the pressure if it's like they can't. I always would say, for example, if I was having like a rough period, and I definitely did after COVID for like a year or two, and I really needed those breaks sometimes. But I always had a fear that I was going to bump into someone from work when I was taking a mental health break, and then they would go into, for example, go back to the workplace and spread gossip. And I think that's what a lot of people have the sort of fear of, and it's learning to, we still need to do better as a society when it comes to that, and for people to be able to feel more comfortable with having those mental health days. Because, sometimes we just need that break to really focus on ourselves, and we shouldn't have that fear about going out and whatever it is to do something for ourselves to feel better. It's like this sort of outdated concept that you have to sit in the house and just, stay in bed. And often, for example, at least with me, it might work with someone else. With me, I needed to get out. I needed to go on a hike. I needed to get out in the sunshine, whatever it was. And at the same time, I felt tremendously guilty. And like if I bumped into someone, they were going to go into work and then they would think it's all fake, that I was just making it up. And I think a lot of people have still fear around that. So it's learning to let go of that. And I know it does vary workplace to workplace, but for a lot of us, it's still that fear, almost like we're being caught. And it's not like we're doing anything wrong. We're taking care of ourselves to come back and do the job
Yeah.
much better. And we need that time. And so it's
Mhm.
it's learning not to associate guilt, with taking time off for your mental health.
Yeah, 100% agree. Like I couldn't agree more. I probably take like 3 mental health walks a week at this point. Like
Yeah.
not like during the work day. but like I need to get out in the sun. I
Yeah.
need to breathe fresh air. I need to not stare at a computer screen for 20, 30 minutes,
Yeah.
and then I'm okay. But I'm grateful that I have a place of employment and a supervisor that allows that to happen.
Yeah.
And as you were saying, that may not be the case. That is not the case for everybody that, has a job or is listening to this podcast or whatever, you know?
Yeah. 100%. And I think taking those, for example, a mental health walk is so important. Like, just having, even if it's 10, 15 minutes of sunlight makes such a difference, and just being able to have a walk and clear out some of the thoughts, and at least for me as well, it helps not to have. I know it's easy for many of us to wake up and start scrolling through the phone. For me, I will avoid like scrolling at all usually until I've done a bit of exercise, or I've had my breakfast, maybe been on a walk, and then I'm like, okay, I'm ready for the day, rather than doom scrolling and on
Hmm.
Instagram Reels, whatever it is. I think it's so important, for at least for me, if I don't start the day off right with my mental health, the whole day can be derailed.
Right. Yeah, and it's so easy to doom scroll these days.
Yeah.
Um, the other thing that I really love, especially in the winter months, is my sun lamp. Which like do it with the advice and consent of a doctor or therapist, as needed. But like, God, my sun lamp changed my life during the winter.
Yeah, they are a miracle. It makes such a difference when, it's getting dark already, 3, 4 o'clock. Maybe it's been foggy for like 3 or 4 days, and it's
Hmm.
like just having that bit of natural light, especially, when you just wake it up and it's like in the 20s or 30s outside, it's snowing and foggy, like having a bit of that light therapy can help a lot.
Yeah, love it.
Yeah.
Also use it as directed because it doesn't always work just the one time. And then I've had
Yeah.
friends who have used it like once and been like, I feel the same. And I'm like, did you use it as directed? Because it says an
Yeah.
hour a day for a week on the box.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I know what you mean. I miss mine actually. I used to have one a few years ago, and well, I think I broke it, but anyway. But it's been so fantastic to have you on. And like I said before, thank you so much for being so open with your story. I think it's incredible the strength that you've shown, and like I said, it's so important having these conversations, and thank you for joining me today and being so open.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's been fantastic having you on. And so for people tuning in, if they want to find you, so what's the best way people can reach you, and any socials for people to reach out?
Yeah, my Instagram is the best way to reach me. I am at Michael, Michael, in like the word in
Yeah.
PHL.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining me today on the podcast. And so, to everyone that's tuned in, thank you so much. And we'll be back next week with another episode.